Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you all very much for being here. We got a full house and some people still coming in, but let's get started. Thank you to everyone who's made this evening possible, Ruth Friendly, my colleagues, Lauren Schaefer, others, but above all, Lester Holt, for your time and engagement with tonight's celebration. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. So this is, for the students here, tonight is a celebration of a really important legacy at the school that is embodied in the career and the life of Fred Friendly. This is the 100th anniversary of his birth this year. I think next week would have been his birthday. And he was a former professor here at the journalism school, but also a giant in journalism in the 20th century and in broadcast journalism. And I think some of you in the Friendly Lab see pictures of some of his era during your seminars. But for those of you who haven't already come across him in your history classes, he was part of CBS News at the dawn of broadcast news journalism and helped with Edward R. Murrow to set very high standards for the birth of television news. And he really played a role in inventing a lot of the conventions that became so much a part of broadcast news during the late 20th century, the news magazine, the television documentary. And he was, as a professor and as a leader in the business, he was a big man and a big thinker, and he really pushed broadcast journalism to engage in public life and with big ideas. He was part of a group of people that brought public television in this country into being. And when he came to the school, he started building out broadcast journalism here with similar kind of ambition and a sense of elevated ideas and standards. He created an innovative training program here for minority journalists. He created an influential series of televised seminars on public television where he engaged with journalists and politicians and Supreme Court justices in Socratic discourse about the big questions of his time. When he passed away in 1998, his family, his widow Ruth, who is with us tonight, and friends and colleagues of his from his broadcasting career banded together under the leadership of the then dean of the school, Joan Connor, to create an endowed professorship in his name and organized around the values and the standards that he embodied. He taught ethics here, and so it was quite a wonderful opportunity for the school to recruit as the first Friendly chaired our colleague, Professor Dick Wald, whose retirement we're also celebrating tonight. Some of you have even gotten to know Dick as a teacher post-retirement, but for many years he has been a force at this school and really carrying forward the ideas that Fred established. And then the final piece of celebration tonight is the transition of that chair from Dick to our great colleague, Betsy West, who had a long career at ABC News and CBS News, 23 years in New York, Chicago, London, 21 Emmys, 3 Columbia DuPont Awards, a great documentarian as well as a great broadcast journalist in every respect. And so we're so grateful to her for taking on this leadership, so grateful to Lester for sharing his time with us to celebrate this transition. And with that, let me turn the evening over to Betsy.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Dean Call. I want to thank everybody for coming out, and also before introducing Lester, I just have to say how incredibly honored I am to be the new Fred Friendly professor. You know, when I was starting out as a young journalist in the profession, we all looked up to Fred Friendly. We devoured his fascinating memoir, Due to Circumstances Beyond Our Control. I mean, we revered the documentaries he did with Edward R. Murrow, like Harvest of Shame, and you know, we really reveled in his battles with the corporate bosses to fight for journalism over profits. He was definitely a standard bearer, and his legacy looms large. The same for Dick Wald. I was very fortunate to have him as a mentor, as a young producer, long before he was my colleague here. And some of you do know Dick, but I just want to say that what a stickler he was for ethics, because at ABC News he was in charge of standards. So one of my memories is I was running a show, and one time I had a producer who was, let's say, a little overzealous in trying to obtain an interview, and as a result of his efforts, ABC News was looking at a 6-figure lawsuit for trespassing. So I was sitting in Dick's office discussing what we were going to do, and in his typically very dry and direct manner, Dick remarked, "You can't just go around butting into people's lives every time you need a good soundbite." And I think Fred Friendly, reading about him, he would have put it this way: just because journalists have the right to do something doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. So doing the right thing, ethics in broadcast news, is the topic of our talk tonight from the man who is now holding the anchor seat at NBC News. Lester Holt was named permanent anchor of the NBC Nightly News this summer, becoming the first African-American to be solo anchor of a network newscast. This came after a 34-year career as an award-winning broadcast journalist that began in 1981 in California, where he grew up. He was a reporter and anchor at major market TV stations owned by CBS in New York and Los Angeles and Chicago. In 2000, Lester Holt got what ultimately turned out to be a big break. He was demoted from his anchor job at WBBM in Chicago, which prompted him to leave for the upstart cable channel MSNBC. There, he quickly gained attention for his informed coverage of the contested presidential election. And over the past 15 years, he'd held a variety of assignments at NBC, including anchor of the Weekend Today and nightly news programs, and the news magazine Dateline. He's also reported in the field from the world's hotspots, from the Middle East, and most recently he was in Paris covering the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack. Early this year, Holt stepped into the breach after it was revealed that nightly news anchorman Brian Williams had fabricated elements of news stories. In June, Holt was named permanent anchor. By all accounts, he was a popular choice at NBC. Holt's appointment was widely praised by his colleagues. One of them described him to me as the anti-anchor monster. So maybe he'll tell us what they mean by that. Please join me now in welcoming Lester Holt. Thank you.
I don't know what that means. I really don't know what that means. Hi, everybody. Betsy, thank you very much, and congratulations to you, and Dick, congratulations to you. Although when I said congratulations earlier, I think his comment, why do people congratulate you when you're leaving? Why not when you're starting? So that's a retroactive one. And Steve, thank you as well for having me here tonight and hosting me. It's great to be here. I want to point out a few people in the crowd. First of all, 4 members of our nightly news family who are our Columbia grads are with us, and I appreciate you guys coming over. And my wife Carol is here. And one of the first lessons I will offer to the students here, you need a patient, a loving, and very understanding life partner if you're going to do this for a living. It takes a lot of your time, and it tests your family life, and I'm happy to have a great partner in Carol, and thank you for being here as well. I'm honored to be here, but I'm also humbled to be speaking at this elite and prestigious school, and humbled also at the likelihood that I may be working for some of you in a few years. So remember how I smiled when I came in? Your best buddy here. You guys are off to a much, much better start than the one I had. Other than 1 semester of journalism, which I probably got a C in, I came into this business with no formal journalism education. From a short stint as a high school country and western DJ at the age 18 and then into 19, I was given the keys to a Jeep Cherokee outfitted with a 2-way radio, and it had police scanners, and they sent me out onto the streets of Sacramento to find news for a local radio station. And from that day on, I guess I was a journalist, because I haven't looked back since. I literally learned this craft on the job. I watched other journalists around me and kind of took notes on how they did things. I sought their advice. I studied their scripts, and as I moved forward, I was lucky enough to have strong mentors, people who were there to correct me, to admonish me, to support me. I made some pretty big mistakes when I was coming up, some that probably if I did today in this era of DVRs and Twitter, I would probably have suffered career-ending injuries. I'm not going to start confessing those to you right now, so take your fingers off the keyboards, put the Twitter down. By the time I was 27, I had worked in TV news jobs in New York and Los Angeles and Chicago. Some pretty big fish bowls for a relative newbie. I obviously had some talent, but the fact is I survived largely because the people I worked with had no interest in watching me fail, which gets to the heart of what I want to chat with you about here in our need to take care of each other and take care of this business that we all love. When I started in the business, if you made a stupid remark on the television that night, or you grossly mispronounced a name, or you misidentified someone, or you tripped over your tongue, it was pretty much forgotten by the next evening. For today's young reporters, mistakes live on forever, and folks will be clicking it on for years to come. Does this sound familiar? Boom goes the dynamite? A few chuckles, you know what I'm talking about. The rest of you will go home and Google it, but you'll get it. In the meantime, it wasn't funny for you. Here's the news flash. A lot of people don't like us these days. Our business is under fire. If you've gone online lately, you get it. We're often portrayed as arrogant and judgmental and anchor monsters. And people now have the tools. This is important. They have the tools to call us out and to publicly expose our shortcomings. Don't get me wrong. A lot of what people call us out on, so-called bias, is simply because we're telling a raw truth that just doesn't happen to fit with their worldview. Journalism, of course, is not supposed to make us comfortable. A lot of times it will challenge what you thought you knew. The point I want to make, however, is after a long history of being accountable mainly to ourselves, our viewers are well equipped to hold our feet to the fire. They know a lot about what goes on behind the curtain, and they're ready to pounce when we don't live up to our mission, and that's probably not a bad thing. But it does mean we have to have each other's backs. We have to mentor and make sure the younger generation of journalists in our newsrooms has the support and the guidance that many of us had. We can't afford for them or anyone to fail because we have to protect this institution of journalism. There will always be those who don't like us. No one said it was fun to be the messenger, always fun, but I want them to respect us. I think that we can earn. And also at the heart of all this is humility, along with respect toward the people we cover. Whenever I travel to places of calamity, most recently that would have been Oregon during the school shooting, I'm always struck by the sea of satellite trucks and the cameras and the reporters and the crews all there who have descended on these communities in mass overnight. It's obviously what we do, it's necessary, that's how we get news on the air, but I'm mindful that we can add trauma to a community already experiencing trauma at that moment. My approach is, when I go to these things, is that could be my town, that could be my house, my loved one at the center of that story. And how would I want to be treated at that moment? In my opinion, there is a lot of room for compassion in what we do. Many of the people who appear on our cameras are there through no fault or action of their own, and they deserve our respect. So in aspiring to be better and to remind people why a free and independent press is vital and necessary, we have to remember that we're not only judged by the quality and the integrity of our reporting, but on how we balance our rightful zeal for getting the story with a healthy dose of humanity. We're in the people business, ultimately. Real lives, real consequences. The takeaway for me after more than 30 years of reporting is this. I have seen moments, seen people face the most horrendous calamities in their lives, moments where I'm certain I would be balled up in a corner crying and unable to move. But yet time and time again, we cover these stories and you see people, they manage to put one foot in front of the other and they live and they move on, reminding me that we don't know what we're truly capable of until we're tested. We need to stand up not only for our profession, but for our audiences and for our colleagues. If there is anything I have learned over the past 8 months is the value of the brand. At NBC News, it is our collective work, the bar that we set for ourselves as a team, as an organization that continues to make us successful at what we do. Journalists of my generation and older love to tell stories of how much this business has changed. The effect of social media, creeping sensationalism, smaller newsroom budgets. But I look at you, and for many of you, that's really all you'll know. It's your present. But none of that changes the fundamentals of our mission to shine a light in dark places and be a voice for those who can't be heard. So I will end my remarks before we take questions on what one of my mentors, the legendary New York newsman Jerry Nachman, told me when I was 20 years old. He said, the highest calling in this business is being a reporter. And so while I now find myself in this prestigious position, sitting at that big glass desk at 30 Rock, I'm reminded at the end of the day, I am a reporter, and that's what I'm most proud of, and hopefully that's what you will be most proud of. So thank you for listening to my remarks, and now the grilling begins. How do you want to do this? Over here?
Yes, can we go over here? Start the grilling? I get to go first. Well, first of all, congratulations on
Thank
getting
you.
the big job.
The big chair?
Yeah, the big chair, easing into the formerly anchor monster role. You know, at the time, there was a lot going on when you got this job. And so the fact that you were the first African-American anchor, the solo anchor of a network newscast kind of came and went. How significant was that for you at the time? And you know, what do you think the greater symbolism of that is?
Well, I mean, like a lot of people of color in this business or any other business, I mean, I didn't define my work certainly by my color, but, you know, obviously mindful of history. My mother likes to tell the story, and I don't remember it. Must have been 5 years old, but she says we were living in Los Angeles at the time, and I apparently turned to her and I said, why are there no colored people on TV? We used to be colored, by the way. It was okay. You know, why are there no colored people on TV? And, you know, she remembers that. And then watching my career, she has reminded me of that time and time again. I love when people come up to me and people say, wow, my son looks up to you, my daughter looks up to you, people of color, you know, recognizing opportunity. I recognize that it is very meaningful to a lot of people. I'm very proud that people can turn on the TV, and not just me, but they can turn on the TV and see people that look like themselves. It's very important, you know, that our broadcast and the people that deliver it and the people that put it together reflect the world and certainly the country that we cover. So I'm very proud. I'm gratified, you know, that it's had such an impact. But of course, my focus is always on just, you know, success. You know, these were not the easiest terms in which I got this job, but as I told everyone, if we're not successful, it will not because I didn't give my all and try.
So, you know, NBC News is certainly not the first organization that has undergone an ethical breach, and you know, there's always a lot of soul searching after something like what happened with Brian Williams happened. I mean, is that the case at NBC? And I'm wondering about your role now as the anchor in helping the organization. You talked about the brand in your speech, and helping, you know, get beyond that. What are the next steps here?
Well, it was very important for me, you know, during that period to talk to the staff, and none of us, of course, knew how, you know, what the outcome was going to be, but I was asked to sit in during that period, and, you know, my message was simply just keep your head in the game. This is what we do every day. We do it well. Nothing changed. The strength of NBC News, as I mentioned, was in the strength of all the people in the room who put that broadcast together, the crews in the field. So my focus really was on just, you know, doing the best newscast possible, and that really hasn't changed. You know, it's a difficult topic for me to talk about for a lot of reasons. One is I tell people it's family business. You know, we were hurt. It was difficult. We had a lot of conversations among the group, but I was just gratified that everyone, you know, stayed focused on what we had to do. You know, I'll leave it to other people to draw their lessons or what have you. But for me, again, the biggest lesson was the fact that the audience stayed with us during that period confirmed my belief that, you know, this news organization, like any other, is larger than one person, that it's a collective effort every day. And I love the fact that we have this incredible give and take every day with these talented dedicated people and helps us put on the best broadcast each night.
So you came up in the business, we both did at a time when the network news anchors loomed large, right? The Cronkites and the Chancellors and the Peter Jennings. And, today, I guess a collective 24 million, I think is the number of people watch all three network newscasts, but that's a lot less than, let's say, 160 million people who are going on Facebook every day. I'm wondering
Gee, thanks.
I know. Well, that's my question.
Now I get the job and we're down to 24 million.
Yeah. How do you see the role of the network newscast? Do we need 3 network newscasts now at 6:30? And what do you see the role and your role as an anchor man?
I was joking, but I'm pretty impressed that collectively 24 million people are pulling up to the TV to watch network newscasts. Frankly, on a given night we're doing 7-8 million people. A lot of programs, successful programs, non-news programs, would be lucky to have those kind of numbers. I'm one of those that believes we are becoming more relevant. And my rationale, and this is really not supported by any science, but my sense is that there is so much noise out there right now in terms of the flow of information. I mean, things move so quickly. Social media is terrific, but you've got to filter through that. You've got to be a critical thinker. Is what's true, what's not true, what's the source, what's the attribution, all the things that traditional journalists have to ask themselves. You don't really quite know what's what. And I believe that will drive people to come to a place that has some legacy, has some standards, that's an honest broker that will, for 30 minutes each night tell you, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's how it played out, here's what they had to say about it, and more importantly, here's how it impacts your life. It's 30 minutes. And I believe that makes us more relevant than before.
You mentioned in your talk that a lot of people don't like us, though. Talk to me a little bit about the kind of politicization or polarization, of the news, the fact that a lot of people want to see news that kind of confirms their worldview.
Well, there's a boutiqueization of news, I call it, because you can always find some outlet, some publication, some broadcast that will present the world just the way you see it and make you feel really good about yourself. I shouldn't admit this, but I do. I generally, the first thing I do when I get off the set, often before I get off the set, I click on Twitter just to see what they were saying. I didn't look tonight. Tonight, Hillary Clinton is probably still right now in front of the House Benghazi committee. I think it was going to go.
I'm so happy you're here,
It was going to go into the evening. But I didn't check it tonight, but I bet if I check my tweets, there will be people that think NBC News absolutely hates Hillary Clinton, and there will be people that think that we're fawning over Hillary Clinton. That's the nature of how people process news. I love when people think they're complimenting me. They go, Mr. Holt, we like you because you don't give your opinion. You don't seem to have an opinion of the news. I'm like, well, that's my job, but it's unfortunate we're at that point where everyone is conditioned to believe that broadcasters, especially when it comes to reporting political issues, have a point of view. I tell people that what sometimes is perceived as a liberal point of view is the fact that we're out there. We see poverty. We travel to the Arctic to see global warming. All these sorts of things. I've been witness to an execution before. All these things, these are real things that we see and can bring those experiences to it. But we're a very divided country, and it certainly reflects in how people consume us. And I think that's going to be the challenge for journalism going forward, is reminding people that mainstream media is a good thing, and that we can be a good force and an important force, and that we're not a popularity contest, that what we do should sometimes make you uncomfortable. Sometimes it will confirm your worldview that you got it right. But we've got to hold people's feet to the fire, and there may be people that our viewers adore, but that's what journalism is about.
So you talked about looking at Twitter. I understand you are pretty digitally savvy. You Periscope. You ate a sandwich, I guess I saw at one point on Meerkat, or I don't know. You do engage a lot with social media. Is that right?
Yeah. I like to engage with people, but I tweet, and I've actually been bad the last several weeks, but I try to embrace, I've been doing Facebook Live, which is their new live app, and, it's interesting. I was in South Carolina a couple of weeks ago covering the floods. We were setting up for nightly news, and suddenly police and firemen, you got to get out of the dam broke upstream. So, I mean, we've got all this gear set up, and we're just grabbing stuff. And of course, that's news. And I'm like, get me on MSNBC. So I grab the phone, I get on Facebook Live. That was my first instinct. It was easier to do that than because the equipment was being broken down. But that's how, reporting, the tools of reporting have changed, but the basics haven't. As it turned out, we didn't have enough bandwidth and one of the issues with that. But that's increasingly how we reach the audience, as a reporting tool and a promotion tool, and just to kind of, let people know that, who the person is that's in their living room every day. I think it's important. It's appointment TV, that people kind of know who you are and kind of know your basic values and get to know you. So it's been a great tool for that.
How about as a tool for trying to figure out what to cover? I mean, I think that can cut both ways, right? I mean, you can get instant analytics now for what's trending on social media, and that can drive coverage decisions. Talk to me a little bit about whether or not that happens at the nightly news.
Well, I'm very careful of, I take a grain of salt everything I read, because especially when it's something that maybe hurts your feelings, you get 4 tweets on, oh my goodness, they hate that story we did. It was 4 tweets, and you have to put that in perspective. That said, we do look at social media to look at trends, and this story's getting a lot of pickup. People are weighing in, and that gives you some gauge that this is a topic that people want to talk about. So we use it carefully as a barometer, not the barometer of what to cover. That's probably the best way to put it.
Can it push you toward a tabloidization? I'll use another ization word of the, I got to find another way to say that. But really to show you that, whatever is trending that is really a story that perhaps isn't the most significant story, but people seem to be interested about Lamar Odom or, whoever it is.
It's a risk, and, those conversations come up, and this is probably one of the great dilemmas of our time, that people tend to want to consume sensational news. And, we're a traditional broadcast, but at the same time, it's 2015. It's not, 1965. So we can't put on that kind of a broadcast. And you do see in social media how these things are resonating. My feeling is you never want to hold your nose for the sake of holding your nose and thinking I'm better than that. You do have to go in and look and feel and touch, and is this a story that's resonating? But I think it's fair to say there is the risk that it could drive you towards stories you might not otherwise cover, but I'm not always sure that's a bad thing. As I said, there are many barometers, which we try and look at as to what drives our coverage.
Yeah, I mean, the news agenda used to be a pretty, it was determined by our professional judgment, by what is the news, right? And that is no longer the case totally.
No, we have so much research at our disposal. We can go online, and not only social media, but just see how, in the trend, and who's covering the story, how it's being covered. There's just so many other ways to find out, what's hitting home with people. But there's also, you have to be also wary of, sometimes there are campaigns, where it seems like a surge of social media on a particular topic, and you have to go in and where's this coming from? And somebody's driving this, somebody with an agenda. So that's another danger of it.
What about the fact that by the time people are watching, the nightly news at 6:30, they may have seen a lot of what's going on? Has that changed really the way you think about the broadcast in any significant way?
It does. In fact, I make the argument that there's no such thing as a 24-hour news cycle anymore. I think it's measured sometimes in 3 hours, 6 hours. I have seen many a time where we come in the morning, something will happen at 8:30, 9:30 in the morning, like, well, we're set. We got our lead story. And then, by 3, 4 o'clock, it's like, I don't know. It's kind of been out there. Things move so quickly, and certainly, companies and politicians have learned you've got to, if you're in trouble, you better get on it right away because things move so rapidly. So I think the notion of the 24-hour news cycle is old school. we turn on a dime sometimes on 5 o'clock, 5:30. Sometimes we're changing the lead of the broadcast, trying to be more relevant, with knowing that something has been out there a long time. Now, frankly, a lot of the stories we cover have been out there. You knew that Hillary Clinton was testifying today, but you don't know all the ins and outs and the implications, and that's where we bring that added value.
So we are going to open up the floor to questions from students, but I'd like you to line up here, and I'll ask one more question before we
Sure.
start that. Your son is followed in your footsteps, and is in Chicago. Is that right? He's
Yeah.
a local reporter.
He is, yeah. I have two sons. My older one is the morning anchor at the NBC station in Chicago, WMEQ.
What do you say to him and all these aspiring students out here about where you think the business is going? What kind of advice are you giving him about? He'll have a different career from your career.
Well,
don't you
I'd
think,
give
or-
him the same advice as anyone else. It's one of the things I tell people getting this business is protect your image, protect who you are. When you work your way through local stations, there will be those occasions where news directors will want to mold you into maybe an area that you're not comfortable with, the kind of story that you're not comfortable with, and obviously you have to work within the system, but if you're not a tabloid person, don't be dragged into that. It's hard to come back, and protect who you want to be, which is very important. In terms of the news, I mean, so much has changed, in the way we gather news, the way we put it on the air, but I really don't think the basics have changed, and I think the real takeaway is that there's still an insatiable appetite for news, for traditional news. I mean, not only are we got 24 million watching the network shows, but local stations are healthy and making money and serving their communities. So I think I'm very optimistic person. The glass is always half full with me. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. But I feel very, very bullish on that there's an appetite. I think the key for us, again, is to remind people why we're important, why we're vital, and why you would be much worse off without us.
Sometimes students are advised to develop their brand and also to be specialists. I mean, you are a generalist in many ways. You've covered so many stories all around the world.
Equally ignorant about everything.
I thank you for putting it that way. But do you make that suggestion? Do you think it's a good idea to specialize in one thing, or do you think there still will be an appetite for local news and the network news model?
Well, I mean, I have two answers to that. One answer is, and I think the key to my survival and/or success is, I use this term a lot in talking to young journalists, you want to become the Swiss Army knife of your newsroom. And that's what I did. When this job came along, I was anchoring Weekend Today, Weekend Nightly, Dateline. I was kind of the go-to guy for launching on big stories. I did weddings, bar mitzvahs. No, that part I didn't do. But I could have. But the point was, I wanted to put myself in a position that you can never get rid of me. You'd have to fire me like 5 times to get rid of me. But it really is important, especially in shrinking budgets and financial pressures. When the bean counters start going over the head count, you want them to go, well, she can do that, and she can do features, and that's really, really important. That said, it's nice to have something you know a lot about. Whether you become a specialist in that, I love airplanes. I'm an airplane nerd. My father was in the Air Force. My wife was a flight attendant. My brother's an airline pilot. Everybody flies but me. But I always loved being around airplanes. And so that became kind of a specialty throughout my career, sharing that. And, it's something that I could do. So I always tell people, be able to do a lot of things, but it's okay and sometimes very helpful. If you happen to like, I like medicine. I like medical stories and health and that sort of thing. It's something you can bring to the table. But as long as you remind them that I can also, do this or that. But it's very important for them to see you, as I said, as a Swiss Army knife, the spoon, the knife, the fork, everything.
You made reference earlier to your wife and to her forbearance. I mean, how tough was that? This is a question that female reporters always get asked. So I'm going to ask you, how tough was this on your family, your can-do attitude, put me in, coach, whatever it is, okay, I'll stay overnight. I mean, that has a toll at a certain point, doesn't it?
Carol?
Yes?
It's tough. I mean, it really is. Local news, had its own challenges. At the network, especially at this level, I mean, when the bell rings, I have to answer it. And it comes sometimes at the worst possible moments. And it's something that you have to accept.
Give me an example of a really bad moment.
Well, let's see. So we're in a beautiful European vacation, and we're in Barcelona, and we're dining and eating, and we're at a museum. No, I know. We woke up one morning. So we wake up, and it's on CNN International or BBC or something, and there's been some earthquake in Japan, and there was this water rushing, and I was like, oh, wow, that looks bad. But it was kind of, the sound was down. I was like, but we were going to this museum and all that, and I said, look, it's the last day of vacation. Do you mind if I just call them and know where I am? So I sent a message. I said, look, I'm probably way out of place. I'm in Barcelona, but whatever. And we went about our day, and up on this hill at this museum, I can't remember which one, but she walks off the ladies' room, and she comes back, and she goes, what's the matter? I said, well, I got to go to Japan. Or I think I had to go to Seoul, because we couldn't get to Japan. I said, I have to go to Seoul. She goes, when? I said, about an hour and a half. Yeah, I'm still paying for that one. So I was off to Japan to get radiated, and she spent a day by herself in Barcelona. I mean, we laugh about it now, but it was, but there have been those nights, we're going out as a family when the kids were younger. What's important is that, your partner understands. It doesn't mean they're not going to be disappointed, because Carol has been disappointed before, but that they understand what you do, that this is part of your DNA. I always look at our job as like a firefighter. A firefighter doesn't wish for, a 12-alarm fire, or at least I hope they don't. But if there's going to be one, you want to be on duty that day. And that's kind of the way we are. We run toward bad things when other people are running away from them. And it seems crazy. Friends all the time looking at me, well, why did they make you go to Afghanistan? I'm like, I asked to go. And they look at you like you're nuts. But that's what we do. And the people around us, ultimately understand that that's part of who we are. But it's not easy.
All right, do we have some questions here from the floor? Please state your name and your question.
Hi, my name is Mary Kakatos. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us, Mr. Holt. My question for you is, what have you learned from your biggest failure or failures?
No, that's a great question. Mary, thank you for that, reminding me of my failures. There was in Betsy's introduction, she mentioned that I had been demoted. And that's, it's probably going to happen in this business. You'll get demoted or fired, but I was promoted to the main anchor, very much like I was here. Boy, I hope this goes better.
Yeah.
And, the ratings weren't clicking for whatever reason. And, I look back, and funny, one of the complaints about me, believe it or not, was, you're too networky. Life's funny that way. But for whatever reason, it just, what happens is they change the set, and that doesn't work, and they change the graphics, and then they get around to the anchors. And I was demoted. But I will tell you this, and in all seriousness, demoted or fired, I get it now. When you feel that for a very long time, in fact, it really shaped the kind of person I was at NBC. I've always had a very strong work ethic. I grew up in a family that, you work hard, and you work harder than anybody else. But a lot of it became almost manic when I moved to MSNBC. I was about 2 weeks from actual unemployment, because after they demoted me, I said, well, I'm going to leave, and they gave me 6 months, and it's not that easy finding a job. So I was just about to hit the streets, and that really, really kind of shattered me and rocked my confidence for a very long time. And so I almost overcompensated, at MSNBC. I was there for everything, and this, and I'll do that and do that. And now that I got this job, I'm going to kick back, but I'm good. But really, And I talk to people, I've counseled other people who have, been through this, and, it rocks your world. But this is a long answer to your question. I'll give you the short answer now. What I learned from that is your bosses are not your friends. And it's really important for you to understand that. You're friendly with them. They're nice people. They're good people very often. You can laugh at the company parties, but at the end of the day, you're working in a business, and they will make the decisions that they feel necessary to move on. And especially when you're in front of the camera, it can be very subjective. But that's the most important thing I learned, is that they're not your friends, because your friends wouldn't do that to you.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Holt. My name is Devanch, and I'm a student here. One of the things one of the comments you made actually made me a bit interested. You said that sometimes people congratulate you when they say, that you don't have an opinion. And then you said that it's my job to not have an opinion. I actually wanted to know that, this notion has kind of it's come under a lot of fire recently, right? The notion of a journalist without an opinion, who is completely neutral.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I said they don't have opinion, but it's an interesting point, because sure, we have opinions, and one of the things I had to learn as a young journalist is when it was okay to kind of throw yourself into the story and acknowledge. I used to be this, I'd go to a tragedy and I'm stoic and I'm asking all the right questions, and because I have no passion. I'm a journalist, and you have to at some point learn that it's not editorializing to grieve with a family that's lost a child. It's not editorializing to just look at forest burned up and whatever the reaction is. You have to be human, but I think that as a mainstream journalist, people, especially not 30 Minutes, people don't want to know what Lester Holt thinks about this particular subject. They do want my informed analysis, and I think that's where sometimes people get confused. I think there are sometimes a story or something you've covered where you can give some informed analysis of what you've observed, but I think that there are plenty of places where people can get opinions. About this time of night, I suspect on cable, there's a lot of people giving their opinions about what happened today, and I watch them, and sometimes I agree with them, sometimes I don't, but I think more than anything, we really have to guard ourselves from that so that people can understand the difference between a program like mine and a program that might be on cable. And I'm not slamming that, perfectly interesting programs with good dialogue, provocative, but we do what we do, and I think there's always got to be a place like that our main commodity is not offering opinions. Thank you for the question.
Hi, I'm Shahar. I'm also a student here. You mentioned bias in your talk, and I was wondering what you thought about Eamonn Holmes' reporting on MSNBC and being corrected on air by the anchor.
I'm sorry, you're referring to which?
Eamonn Holmes, he was corrected on air by the anchor of MSNBC for giving a mistaken or incorrect report on air live.
I'm not familiar with that. I might be confusing that there was another incident regarding a map or a graphic.
No, it was I think this week. He was reporting on something happening live in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and he was biased in his reporting, saying that the attacker didn't have a knife in his hand when video showed he did. And the anchor on air corrected him, saying, "You're mistaken. There was this and that happening." So I was thinking, in a general note, what were you thinking about journalists live and sometimes not correcting each other? And
well, it's a good question, and
bias?
I'm not purposely evading your question. I was not specifically aware of that, so I'm not going to judge whether I know Eamonn. I can't imagine he would say something that wasn't true, and maybe there was a mistake, but we'll leave it at that. But I will say that I think one thing I've learned is if a mistake has been made, correct it now. And I think it's more important than ever because of how quickly things circulate, on the internet. And I've learned that. I remember, there were times I'd make a mistake and think, oh, no one caught it. And then oh my goodness, they caught it. When all it takes sometimes is to say, you know what, that was a stupid remark, or I'm sorry. And especially in nightly news and our kind of programs, we're pretty scripted. But in cable, when I was on MSNBC, sometimes you're going for, you've done your 15th live shot, or you're out there for your 3rd hour in a breaking news, and sometimes you say dumb things. And one of the things I really learned was that it's okay to just, I'm sorry I misstated that, or that wasn't well chosen. In terms of correcting other reporters, it's not something you'd like to do. I can't remember if I've ever had to do that, but I think it's something I would do if it's a major factual error, and better to correct then, and as difficult a position as you might put that person in, better to correct then than to let it fester and become a thing. And I'm sorry I'm not specifically familiar with that, but.
Fine, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm June Cross. I'm a professor here at the school, a colleague of Professor West. As an African-American anchor, as the first African-American anchor of a daily news show,
Yay.
you're standing on the shoulders of people like Max Robinson and Ed Bradley, who came before you. You spoke about not allowing news directors to shape who you are. James Baldwin wrote about this idea of the price of the ticket. What's been the price of the ticket for you in order to become the first African-American anchor of a major news show?
Well, I'm going to answer that question carefully because I don't want to, I don't bite the hand that feeds me. I don't know that, I've been asked this question a lot, and I remind people, yeah, first African-American, but there's only been a handful of people that have held these jobs, and they don't open up very often. I mean, I will tell you, up until last February, I was already kind of plotting my exit from this, my last years in this business, and I had 3 great jobs, and this was not something I aspired to, and wasn't even in my realm of thinking because it wasn't going to happen for me, and circumstances allowed it to happen. I don't know the price. I mean, I think there were times that I felt, and not at NBC, but I think there was moments I thought, man, I'm just working my butt off, and here I am, and I'm the weekend guy. And I'm not talking about it here at NBC, but because of the way I was raised, I was never a sense of, because I'm African American. I don't tend to think in those terms.
Yeah,
but
we
I did
work in
some.
all-white newsrooms, and we have to sort of accommodate the story ideas that we do to the idea of the mainstream.
Well, I mean, I will say this, that I was raised, and I think it's fair to say that in a lot of homes of color, we're taught that, if you work harder than everybody else, if you lay it out there, then you're going to go farther. And sometimes, that's not enough. And I think, one of the things I've had to learn is, you've got to sell yourself, and that's something that I wasn't raised with. This notion of that it's a meritocracy. If you work hard, you'll get there. But then you come, and the reality of life is you have to sell yourself, and that's, we used to call it kissing up, but I think that's unfair because I think I'm realizing now it's a tool. It's an important tool, the ability to be able to navigate and remind people of your value. And but your other point, we've had to, sometimes we have to remind the newsrooms, that as I haven't. It's never something I've worn on my sleeve, but there have been those moments you have to remind them, I am an African American, and this is an area that we have to cover. When I was in Chicago, one of the issues we had was every African American, it seemed like, who was on TV was in handcuffs. And I remember, a lot of us, got very involved in that and said, look, it was the beginning of the diversity conversation that, there are a lot of other places that African Americans be on this broadcast, the journalism professor, the lawyer, the physician. So there had been those moments. I don't know that, that it had any effect on where I ultimately got, but I think it was all about really just that learning that, meritocracy only goes so far.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Holt. My name is Danny Fun. I write for the Columbia Journalism Review. Professor West said that Fred Friendly was known for fighting for journalism over profit. What's an area where broadcast news today comes up short on that measure? That's
a good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer. Comes up short in terms of?
Airs too far on the profit side.
Okay.
Now, ratings are, a driving force, perhaps, or?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's great focus on ratings. There's always been great focus on ratings. But, you know, I think sometimes it forces, well, let me back up. I mean, from the newsroom standpoint, we just don't think in terms of the business side of it, yet we do. We think in terms of the ratings. We don't often, in our minds, we don't think about the dollars that generates. But we do understand that we need stories that will resonate. And sometimes we have to, you know, look at a story, and sometimes we'll look at it and we'll say, you know, it's the broccoli. It's a story you've got to cover, knowing it's not going to, you know, maybe, you know, have the sizzle. Those decisions are sometimes made. But in terms of, I can honestly say, you know, in the newsroom, we don't think of it as, I have no idea how much my broadcast generates. I really don't. I've never asked. We think in terms of just success, in terms of the ratings. Someone else translates that into the profit.
All right.
Can I,
Thank you.
following up on that, I mean, do you sometimes feel that there are important stories that are just too complex and boring for you to be able to present them on the nightly news?
I think there's, you know, it's a challenge of all broadcasters. There's some stories that you look at and go, well, that's a great Sunday newspaper article, but we've got to do it in a minute 45 or 2:15. But it doesn't mean you always shy away from it. I mean, sometimes that's the challenge. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be covered, but we've got to become more creative to give that story voice and make it work for television. So, yeah, we confront that sometimes, but more often than not, if it's a good story, we find a way to overcome. I mean, you know, fortunately today we've got, you know, great graphic engines and things that we can animate and help bring the story to life. And the other thing is, you know, ultimately we like to bring the story down to the level of the people who are affected. So get away from some of the wonkiness of a story. So you just have to stand back and be creative, and that's what we do.
That's a Fred-friendly thing, the little picture for the big story.
There you go.
So, yeah.
Hello, Mr. Holt. Thank you. I'm Zach. I'm a student. You spoke of compassion and the need for humility and approaching work as a journalist with a healthy dose of humanity and having that to balance the zeal for getting the story. Do you think this becomes more complicated or challenging in this current media landscape where you said, as you put it, no one knows what is what, and there's this need for speed when information circulates so rapidly?
I do. You know, one of the difficult things of our business now is because we're so competitive is booking wars, trying to get the big get of a story, and you want to do that as quickly as possible. I've lost a lot, and I'll tell you why. Because I generally will approach someone, write them a note, or call them, and you know, I'm like, look, I know a lot of people are going to want to talk to you. We would love for you to tell your story and to bring to life, you know, your loved one and your loved one's story or whatever. But I say, but you know, the most important thing for you right now is to take care of yourself. And when you're ready, here's my number. I'd love the opportunity. You know, I've gotten bookings because of that, where people respect that, but I know I'll lose some. But I was never good in my local days. I was never good at making that door knock and trying to convince someone why they need to go on television to talk about, you know, the worst day of their life. It's important. I mean, in a lot of stories, and I have had cases where people are very eager to go on because they want to honor a loved one or they want to expose a wrong. But I'd rather lose a slew of bookings than become this insensitive, uncaring jerk, frankly.
If I may ask one more question, do
You could be a White House correspondent. That's what they do.
I think a lot of people would agree that that's extremely ethical in the way you carried yourself. Would you say that some journalists are wary of being human in that way because they don't want to be perceived as biased or somehow emotionally invested in the source of the story they're covering?
Well, I mean, you become emotionally invested in that it's a fellow human being. And as I said, I go through this exercise almost every time I do these kind of stories. I'm like, what if that was my wife? What was that my kid or my house that just went down the mountain? So I approach it as, you know, you're not my best friend, but you're like me. When I was in Hungary a month or so ago, you know, talking to these migrants coming over the Serbian border, I'm looking at these folks and I'm going, you know, a lot of them are just like me. I don't speak their language, but you know, that by accident of birth, you know, I could have been the one, you know, with you know, my kids on my back and making my way across this border. And I just try to remember that. You know, it's like I've got to live with myself. I've been very successful doing what I do, but I just think it's important to be honorable and to be forthright with people. And I'm not taking a shot at those who are more aggressive at booking, you know, stories. You do what's comfortable for you. But that's kind of where I draw the line. I really feel that people deserve our respect and compassion.
Good evening, Mr. Holt. Thanks for being here. My name is Erin Mathewson. I'm a student. I was thinking about those two reporters who were recently killed on camera in Virginia, and I was wondering how you deal with your own safety and like how you deal with if you have any fears around being on camera or being in places that you might get hurt.
That's a really good, interesting question. The answer is most journalists are born with this weird gene that says it can't happen to me. I think it's becoming less of a gene because of the things we've seen in the world. I didn't think that had affected me the way it did. Obviously, it was awful. But I didn't realize I'd internalized it, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because a few days later, I was doing a broadcast in New Orleans, the anniversary of Katrina, and I forget the area there by the French Quarter, but there were people gathered around watching the broadcast. And suddenly I became very aware of all the people standing around me, and every time I would throw to tape or throw to commercial, I was doing this. And it was weird. I'd never had that kind of experience. But, you know, what had happened there, those of us in the business, we've all done that live shot before, you know, that we've been that person, and it was frightening. Now, on a larger scale, we obviously go into very dangerous places, and we are required to undergo some specialized training. In fact, I'm going for my recurrent training this weekend, in which we are, taught everything from, basic trauma medicine to, how to look for booby traps in cars, to weapons, to, dealing with being kidnapped, those sorts of lovely thoughts. But it's a reality of the places we go. And I have been in situations where I've had to use some of that training, so it's very valuable. Depending on the story, the network will send security, but sometimes it's just not practical. And we're always reminded that we may be our first line of help, we being our colleagues. So, yeah, we're very mindful of it, but you can't be fearful in this job, but you can be smart, and you learn, about calculated risks. But thank you for the question. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pavni Mittal. I'm part of the MA Politics class. I used to actually be an anchor with CNBC in Mumbai, and something that my colleagues and I grappled with often was that how do you, when you become an anchor, also continue your on-ground reporting and balance that and make sure you don't lose out on that? Because like you said, you are ultimately a reporter and you're there because of your reporting.
One of the things I hated when I first, I was thrust into filling in on this job, and everything stopped in my life. It was like, well, I got to show up. I wasn't used to coming to work 5 days a week, frankly, because the way my job was, I did the weekends, so I had to be at the studio. The rest of the week, I had 2 days off. The rest of the week, I was on planes shooting this story or shooting that story or doing this, and maybe come in for 2 hours, maybe come in for 10 hours. And suddenly I was thrust in this position where I'm coming to this building every day at 8:30 in the morning, and it was like, oh my God, this is what it's like to have a job. It was bizarre. I'm sorry, I'm distracted from your question. Your question was
How do you balance your on-ground
the
reporting?
balance of reporting, yeah. And so when I did get the job, I was kind of nervous because I can't sit here and be handcuffed to this desk, because I am a reporter. I love being out in the field. I love being with people. And fortunately, my bosses, Deborah Turner as our news president, we're on the same wavelength on that. And so that's why you see we've taken the broadcasts on the road a number of times to where news is happening. And my benchmark is always, let's do it if we think that I can get something as a reporter that we might not otherwise get, or a booking or whatever, by virtue of me being on the ground. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but that has been good. The other thing is, and this is part of my crazy work ethic, I still like to do stories, so there have been days where I have gotten up and caught a 6 a.m. flight to Detroit, knocked out a couple of interviews, and then get back on the plane in time for nightly news and hoping that the LIE is okay. So I really like to report, and it's sometimes very difficult, and it's very frustrating. I had something I wanted to do that would have, put me on a plane tomorrow night, but it didn't work out. I'm like, I mean, it would have made my weekend crazy, but it's like what I like to do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Holt. My name is Sasha. I'm a student here. I've been told to say that this is the last question, so I apologize that you're stuck with me.
Make it good.
Very good.
So my question is sort of dipartite. Number one, we've been talking a lot about buying and selling between ratings, selling yourself the right way, and sort of the financial aspect, but also finance as a metaphorical concept in journalism. And I wonder, number one, how do you find a good way to brand yourself besides just the high-minded, well, this is what I want to do? And then the other thing is, do you think that there's always an equivalency between what you owe and what you're paying?
What you owe and what you're paying.
Like what you owe as a journalist to your public and what you're giving of yourself.
Okay. Well, there's always that moment when it dawns on you that this is a business you work in, and it comes in new and different ways. I've been there, when changes of ownership and changes of priorities. It's a public service, but it's also a business. And the worst thing a reporter can do is become involved in the business side. We do what we do, and we want them to be successful so we can do what we want to do, and that they will invest in us. In terms of selling yourself, I mean, that's where I got back to you kind of have to protect your image. And you'll be asked to do things that maybe you feel cheapens you, or it's it makes you feel uncomfortable. And I always give the advice that work with them. Don't say no. Last thing you want to do is become that malcontent in the newsroom. So you come back and you say, I'm uncomfortable with that, but here's an idea. What if we did this, this, and this, and help them through this process? Because there are a lot of pressures, the people above you, and you don't know often where those pressures are coming from, but you can feel a person under pressure. And so you do owe a debt to your viewers. People, deserve, a good news story and to be told well and with integrity. And but I don't know that you have to give up anything for that. It's hard to explain. It's a difficult juggling act at some point, but that's why you have to become true to yourself, and they know who you are, what you stand for, and where you draw your lines. But remember, whatever you're doing, you're gonna have to live with it, because that image is gonna follow you around. I don't know if I fully answered your question.
That's great.
But I tried.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
That is a good answer. I have been told that I have to make the following 3 announcements quickly, and then I'm going to enthusiastically thank you, because this has been so fantastic. But let me make my announcements first. For those of you who are guests, admissions applications to the 2016-17 school year now open, so we have to do our promotion too. If you know anyone who's still interested, get in touch with the admissions office, and contact is on the slide there. Reminder, we have an MA, an MS, and a PhD program. On Tuesday, November 10th, we're going to have Meredith Artley, Managing Editor, Vice President of CNN Digital, here for the annual Hearst Digital Media Lecture, RSVP to JSchool, RSVP at columbia.edu. And Thursday, November 12th, we're very busy here, we'll be hosting Mark Stevens, award-winning lawyer from the United Kingdom, this year's Poliak Lecture on the First Amendment, RSVP, the same place, JSchool, RSVP, columbia.edu. A real heartfelt thanks to you. It's been a privilege to hear from you and to talk to you, and just thank you for being here at the JSchool.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.